Transition a little bit into some basketball. I've been kind of not avoiding the basketball talk, but there's just been so much football stuff to react to, especially with not only Indiana. We had the Notre Dame upset this past weekend. The NFL's back. I'm going to talk with Bob Kravitz about Tyreek Hill here in a little bit, just because that was kind of a crazy situation. But a couple of names to watch on the recruiting trail for Indiana basketball as we still find ourselves in the offseason, inching our way towards Hoosier hysteria in mid-October.
Yeah, so I mean, obviously you have the core group of big names, right? With Jalen Harrelson, Trent Sisley, Brayan Mullins, Mikel Brown in there as well, and then Bryson Tiller, right? Those are kind of the core group of guys that have really been names that Indiana's been involved with for quite some time that you continuously hear. Jalen Harrelson, right? Obviously, just had his visit to Indiana. That continues to move in a very positive direction for Indiana in terms of their ability to land him. I think that's kind of been more on the uptick over the last 6 to 7 months than it was previously. For any kind of point guard, for any kind of guard in general, right there's a lot of still momentum in terms of coming off obviously the Jalen Hood Schifino season. Had a little bit of a down year last year in terms of overall guard production, but you were able to see right what Trey Galloway was able to kind of develop into, and then move into this year, right, where you have Canyon Carlisle and Miles Rice, two guys who obviously are bound to kind of take leaps and bounds about what they did the previous season in the Pac-12. So there's a lot of confidence that as a guard, you're going to be able to come into this offense and produce, and at least have the keys to start, as a freshman, or at least produce as a freshman, right? Even going back to Gabe Cup. So Jalen Harrelson sees that. He sees the ability to kind of maybe take over this offense a little bit. And I think you're going to see this year a much more NBA style offense from Indiana, because you do have those talented guards, much more what you saw 2 years ago versus last year. When it comes to kind of maybe some potential newer names right on the radar, not necessarily a new name. Indiana offered him a little over a year ago, Eric Reibe, a 4-star center, originally from Germany, came over. He's in the Maryland area now, but a 7-footer, not sure, prototypical 7-footer, right? A guy who can come out, step out, produce from the perimeter. Really good on both ends of the floor, inside the paint as well, but much more of a, I guess, hybrid center that you would see in today's day and age, in today's game. Much more of a fluid athlete, guy who has a lot of really good touch around the rim as well, and not a true body banger that you would necessarily see maybe 5-10 years ago, or even still kind of currently in the Big Ten. Indiana sending a full staff to see him today. A guy who actually moved up his official visit from beginning of October to September 20th. So he will be on campus with Brayan Mullins. He will be on campus with Trent Sisley at the end here of September, coming up next week. So critical next two kind of touch points for the Indiana coaching staff today and then next weekend to be able to really kind of change a little bit of the momentum in this recruitment. A lot of buzz around Kansas right now, and kind of having him step in for Hunter Dickinson. And we know kind of what that, Kansas offense looks like. It's traditionally, one big guy with 4 kind of hybrid perimeter players and some really talented guards on the outside there. That offense and that system's been set in stone. There's no questions about it, right? So I think for Indiana, it's really going to be about selling him that, hey, look what we've done with development with Trace Jackson Davis. Look what we've developed with Khalil Ware, right? And then obviously Omar Ballo, a very good college player up to this point. Look what we're going to do with him. Obviously, the expectation is Reeves not going to wait until the spring to commit. So he's not really going to be able to see some of that true development maybe from Omar Ballo that you may see in 3-4 months. But it's at least another touch point of, hey, this is a potential All-American. He's been in the All-American conversation, right? Whether it's, 3rd, 4th teams on any of these lists, preseason and end of season for the past couple of years now. And out of everywhere, right, that he could have gone, he decides to go to Indiana because he saw the development potential that he had. So, Indiana is going to continue to push that with any type of big man that they come across, because that's their biggest selling point, and it's one that not a lot of other teams have at this point with a consistent theme. So that's a name to continue to watch. The next 2 weekends again are going to be extremely critical, and potentially making that shift from maybe a Kansas lean to a little bit more of an Indiana lean. UConn's heavily involved. He's coming off of a visit there. Oregon, Creighton, some of the other schools as well. But Oregon right now is the last visit that he does have scheduled at the end of the month. So, there's a lot of expectation that going into October is kind of where you'll see Eric Reibe initially kind of, settle down and make that commitment to whichever school he does. But that's a name to continue to watch. And then obviously, we know Brayan Mullins in and out at this point, right? The kind of priority
and
target
the momentum
of the
with him
2025
has
class.
kind of been, obviously it's been kind of shifty. And I know being down here with a lot of Kentucky fans and media and stuff like that, a lot of people really high on him and potentially committing to UK and Lexington. I don't know if that's still the way you're feeling or seeing it, but that's been an interesting kind of shift. Really, since Brayan Mullins took his big leap over the summer, it seems like just everybody is interested in grabbing somebody like him.
Yeah, 100. I mean, North Carolina, right, is involved there. Pretty much, UConn's obviously heavily involved. Every single kind of big blue blood program right there is extremely interested in Brayan Mullins. I think the Kentucky momentum is kind of halted with them getting Jasper Johnson. Not sure, how those two specifically fit together. Jasper Johnson, a really terrific 5-star guard, but needs the ball in his hands a lot. He's not a great playmaker for teammates. He's a decent passer, but not a guy who's going to really pass his teammates open. So a guy who really needs the ball in his hands a lot to be extremely effective, which he is. So I'm not sure that train's going to continue. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to still UConn or Indiana, right? I mean, you've seen what UConn's been able to do with all types of guards, whether they're extremely athletic, whether they're just gritty and tough, whether they're tall, whether they're short or long, athletic, whatever the case may be. They have a system in place for any sort of guard to go there. And it's more about the mentality fit and how they fit with Dan Hurley than anything else. It's not necessarily, yes, it's obviously skill and how they fit into the system, but if you have the right mentality and you can go play for Dan Hurley, you're going to succeed there, especially at the guard position, and we've seen that. And then obviously with Indiana, right, the hometown pull, the desperate need for playmakers in the backcourt, but more importantly, guys who can just flat out shoot the ball, and that's their big pitch, right? I mean, I think at this point it's probably going to come down to those two, but you still can never count out at this point in his young career here, Mark Pope. At Kentucky, I just don't think that traction is going to sustain after getting Jasper Johnson. And I think Kentucky fans will be okay with that, right? Grabbing Malachi Moreno and Jasper Johnson as the first two commitments for the Mark Pope era, right? In terms of high school guys, that's a pretty good way to kind of jumpstart your 2025 class. But I think Indiana needs a guy like Brayan Mullins a little bit more than Kentucky does at this point. So I think that's going to outweigh that one.
And then with Sisley, do you feel like Indiana, Mike Woodson, do you think they kind of have the upper hand, not only because of him formerly being an in-state guy, but also now being affiliated and associated with Montverde, which obviously Mike Woodson's done a terrific job at kind of making that place a priority for bringing in some of his most important pieces of his recruiting classes. How do you think that ends up shaping up in the next couple of months?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's a win-win for both, right? I think at the end of the day, wherever Sisley, if he stayed home, if he went somewhere else, I think I don't necessarily know if that was going to impact his recruitment too much. I think the schools that are involved, are the ones, right? Indiana, Purdue, and Michigan State. Those seem to be the three that kind of stand out above. I think it's Iowa and Notre Dame, right? The other two is top five there. But I think you look at Michigan State, Indiana, and Purdue as the three, and those have been theoretically the three for almost a year and a half at this point. And it's more so been just about developing those relationships, getting any sort of small edge that you can when it comes to those three schools. And I think a lot of it's going to have to do with, truly development and style of play for Trent Sisley. I think, he's that tweener kind of hybrid forward who can play a little bit down in the post. He can play a little bit more on the perimeter. He showed a little bit more perimeter oriented skills this past summer. which I think was really good for not only his overall development, but I think for a lot of these schools to see that, maybe he would have the potential to, play maybe a bigger three at times, or, play that small ball four, where he's not, he's not a very, he's a physical player and he can take contact, but he's not a true, paint presence on either end of the floor. So you need a good style and system for him to succeed in, because he's not a guy who is going to demand the ball from his teammates, right? He's soft spoken. At times, right, he can get in your face a little bit when he gets into a groove offensively, especially inside the game itself. But he's a soft spoken guy who will gladly do anything and everything to win. So I think it's a lot more about system and scheme for him and where he ends up. The development that he's going to get down there is obviously, I think, super beneficial for him and whichever program does end up receiving his commitment. But I don't necessarily know if it tilts the scale towards Indiana necessarily in a way, right? I mean, I think you have obviously the good blood there with Jalen and Malik, and then obviously what happened with Liam McNeely, right, may kind of level things out just a bit. But I don't necessarily know if a move anywhere. He could have gone to Alaska. He could have gone to Florida. He could have gone up to New York. I think at the end of the day, it's going to come down to those other couple things more than anything else.